the podcast, my biggest passion project to date. It's something that I wanted to do for many, many, many years. When I first had the idea of running my own podcast, it was me and two other people in the fitness space. And I really wish that I'd started back then when I knew I should have done. But for various reasons, I didn't. I procrastinated time and time again. And I want this episode for anyone out there that wants to start a podcast or is wondering whether it's right for them to start a podcast. I want this to be the inspiration for them to decide to start and understand why this is, in my opinion, the best media format to date. So why is it I wanted to start a podcast? For me, some of the most best stories and the most exciting times in my life was meeting interesting people and hearing their story. I think there's so much wisdom and inspiration that comes from a good conversation. And I tend to find that my day ends up always better from the conversation I've had with other people. Podcasting, certainly in today's pandemic world, is a way of connecting with people that you might not have connected with before. If we don't have the opportunity to go out and meet some people, or people aren't in your local area, you can have this fantastic ability to speak to people in your niche, in your market, or people that generally just inspire you. Before podcasting started, if I wanted to speak to somebody, I would be paying hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of pounds for consult fees. But with the podcast, it's amazing how many people will give you their time because most people like talking about themselves. And I'm happy to facilitate that and to listen to them talk about themselves and learn the lessons from it. So how do you go about starting your own podcast if you think this is something for you? My biggest bit of advice is just to start. Don't be like me and wait 5-6 years of thinking about starting a podcast and wishing you could. Just start. It's never going to be perfect. You're going to get better as you go, but you'll never get better if you're thinking about it, trying to find the perfect microphone, the perfect setup, the perfect guests. Just start. Find what you do along the way. I had some great bits of advice from Elliot Hassoun, who's been on the show, and Brett, who's also been on the show, about how to get started, how all their perfect setups, and they run really fantastic podcasts, which I will link in the show notes below. And I still procrastinated for a few more months. It was only once I actually got set up to Buzzsprout, which this podcast will be hosted on, that I found it was actually much simpler than I was thinking about. And I was procrastinating, being, well, will it be difficult? How do I get it out there? How do I put it on all these platforms? And Buzzsprout really, really made this simple. So I have an affiliate code that I'll put in the show notes below about Buzzsprout. They're not sponsoring the show or anything, but I generally use them. And I think if you're looking to start a podcast and want to make it easy for yourself, they are a very, very good place to go. When you sign up to Buzzsprout, you basically can upload all your information, show notes, your thumbnail for the show, and literally sign up on their page to all these places like Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcast from. And you can then just upload shows, click publish, and it will just go to everywhere. It also provides the stats that I sometimes show with my top 5, which is a great way of remarketing the podcast and leveraging your audience and your guests more long after they have actually been on the show and the initial hype is gone. So definitely go and look at Buzzsprout. It's made things so much easier for myself. And it also allows me to have a website that I can link to potential guests if they want to check out the show and seeing if I'm worth investing their time into. So you've got set up, you've signed up on Buzzsprout, you've now got a podcast. You now got to make your podcast stand out in a very, very busy, crowded and saturated market. So choosing your artwork. To make your artwork, I would look at a site called Canva. Canvas I use a lot for my social media content, but I also use it for all my artwork for the podcast. It's a simple way of, designing templates, thumbnails that don't need heavy design knowledge. It really is just plug and play. For me, that was a real game changer. Even in the early days when I entirely did it myself with the thumbnail work, it made it look semi-professional. Was it perfect? No. Did it get better over time? Yes. But it at least made my podcast stand out from the other content that was out there, certainly on my feed and maybe some other feeds as well. So now you've got your podcast set up and you've got a bit of artwork to show your podcast off and make it stand out in someone's newsfeed. You now want to decide on what your topic is. Now, there's a million topics for podcasts, right? Every topic in the world has a podcast, from Dungeons and Dragons to health and fitness. So when you're deciding on a topic, the 2 questions I would generally ask you is, what do you know well enough to talk about? What network do you have that would be able to speak about certain topics? And what other podcasts do you admire? If you're sitting and listening to this and want to start a podcast, then you probably listen to other podcasts. Whose shows do you listen to? What do you like about those shows? What could be better about those shows? How can your show be a little bit different? Now, I don't think you have to be absolute standout different. If you looked and admire someone else's podcast, for me, it was London Real, it was Tim Ferriss's show, it was RXD Radio by Jordan Shallow. If those things stand out to you, look at what you can take and do with your personality. And then the last bit of starting a podcast is, how do you actually record the show? Now, there's a few ways of doing this, and this is just the way I currently do it, and I might change this soon, but I just keep it really, really simple. I know if I try and overcomplicate things, I'll procrastinate on it and it just won't get done. So for me, when I'm recording, I just set up a Zoom link for them when I book the show, and I just click record on the Zoom. That will allow you a folder then that will have your audio content and your video content all in one place in a folder, and then you can move that into however you edit your podcast moving forward. So the pros of this is it's mega, mega simple. Most of your guests will regularly use Zoom and know how to use Zoom, so there's a less sort of friction for getting your guests on the show. But the downside is it will leave you with black bars around your content. Now, a good editor can remove those for you, but I personally don't know how to do that myself. So just bear that in mind when starting a show. So now you've got your podcast up and running, the next question I often get asked is, how do you book guests? I've been very lucky and privileged with the guests that I have got on the show. And a lot of people ask me, like, how have you got so many guests on your show? And for me, I think a lot of it is building up a network over years. I spent a lot of money in my education. I've had some phenomenal mentors. I've really taken my education and my craft very seriously. And for that, I've met a lot of people, a lot of really interesting people are pushing my industry forward or other industries forward and on top of their game. I also meet people that want to learn more and have that sort of same mindset of liking podcasts and liking having good conversations. But if you don't have that network, or, you know, in terms if you don't know how to leverage that network, first think about who you want to have conversations with. I see people trying to force it and just messaging people for the sake of a good topic, or finding a third party way of finding guests, and they're good, and I'll talk about a few of those later, but for the most part, you want to maintain a high quality of work. I take great pride in the quality of conversations I have on my podcast, and I wouldn't really want to publish anything that goes below that standard. And because of that, I think a lot of that is down to the fact that I choose who I'm going to have good conversations with first. If I'm interested about someone, their story, their journey, their business, it will inevitably lead to better conversations than if I'd had someone I didn't know that I had to sort of crash course some research for. Now, once you've kind of got those people on your show and you've reached out to those people, think of a good topic. And anytime you have an idea, jot your topic down somewhere, write it in a notebook, write it on your notes on your phone, and then find a guest that you like to talk to fit that topic. So some people, it's like, I just wanted to speak to Jordan Shallow. I just wanted to speak to Pat Davison. I just wanted to speak to Cassim or Chris Van Vliet. But some of the topics, I've got some really, really, really cool, interesting people in my local network that maybe are earlier on in their career, but they really fit the topic I wanted to speak about. For example, the Bond debate that I did with my good pal Rob, and the Christmas special episode that I did with my good pal Rob, is that I want to do an episode on the Bond debate to talk about the pros and cons of that latest Bond movie and give it a full review. The Christmas special was aimed to kind of get us cancelled, and thankfully it hasn't. But I wanted somebody who had out their thoughts. I wanted somebody like Bond, and Rob fit that bill, and I knew I'd have a good conversation with him. So when I thought of that idea, I worked back and went, who would be the right person to have this conversation with? The Business Pitfalls episode with Alex Searle was very, very similar. I've known Alex for many years. I was one of the people running education in his early gym, and he's really taken a shine to his business, and he's had some great success over the years. And while we often get business advice from people who have 5, 10, 15, 20 years into their business and have great success, sometimes they forget what it's like to be in the early stages. Alex has phenomenal success in his business and it's ever growing. And I knew this would be a great topic for him to discuss and broaden my reach more than just health and fitness. And Alex was the perfect guest for that. When it comes to reaching out to guests that you may not know though, it's a numbers game. Be ballsy and don't take people ignoring you personally. Remember that some people that you'll reach out to may not even run their own DMs. They might have VAs. You may never ever get your message in front of them. So the best thing I would recommend is be ballsy. Message anyone that you feel that you want to have a conversation with. Some will hit, some will not. But sometimes you'll be very surprised that people have reached back out to you and are happy to be on your show. Chris Van Vliet is a great example of this. Pat Davidson was a great example of this. And Simon Miller from What Culture was a great example of this. I'd shared a few messages with him before, but I didn't expect him to be so happy and open to be on the show. So be ballsy. Drop a message out. Some will hit, some will miss. But the more you do this, the more people you reach out to, eventually the more people get on your show. And as your show grows, the more people that will make a point of saying yes. So how do you construct these messages? First off, you should start by thanking them for the content and show them that you've known them for a while. Even better, do something for them. You want to show in that initial message that you're not here to say, hey, could you do something for me? Could you help my podcast? You want to make it out that you really want to speak to this person and you really think that their content is valuable enough for your audience. I always reach out to people by having a good amount of research done on that guest, knowing who they are, what they do, and having something that has affected me. So I will thank them for their content I've been following for a while. It's really helped me with X, Y, and Z, and then go on to the pitch. Or if, even better, as I said, do something for them. Hey, I've been following your content for a while. I really enjoyed your podcast with X. Pardon me. I've given your podcast a 5-star review, or I signed up to your course last year and it was absolutely phenomenal. People are much more receptive to, coming on your show if you've done something for them. If it's a two-way street here, they feel like they will owe you and they're more likely to come onto your show rather than you just trying to leverage them for your own network. Once you've opened up with that, I would then go and expanding on what your show is and who it's for. Explain the topic that you had in mind and why they are the right guest for that topic. This will show that you've done your research. I would like to speak about your upbringing. I noticed that you have a lot of integrity and you say it how it is. I want to learn if that's nature or nurture. Or you speak about being in business and not having to have any sacrifices. I'd love to discuss that more on a podcast of how people who are overwhelmed by business break through that and get started. Think about what your guests can talk about that may be slightly different to other podcasts they've been on that's a little bit more generic and what they talk about 300 times a day. This will get them excited about being on your show. Once you've done that, send a link to your show page. As I said earlier on, this comes with Buzzsprout. You'll have your own website with all your shows. You can link it into there and go, if you want to have a look at my show, have a look. If you're up for coming on the show, let me know and I'll send you a Calendly link. So that's your message. And for anyone that messaged across saying yes, send them across a Calendly link, especially for your show. You're going to find people in different time zones. It's always going to be tricky if you're bouncing back and forth with emails. Calendly minimizes those issues. If you send them a Calendly link, they will see the times it's available that's in your diary and theirs, and they'll just book in for whatever length your podcast is. You can ask them questions on there beforehand if you want. I often ask if there's a product that they want to promote, or even if there's an affiliate link for a product they want to promote. That means that money can come in to support your show and you can also support your guests at the same time. But that really makes things much, much easier. However, be prepared to be flexible. I'm doing a call soon at 1 a.m. in the morning here with Sean Croxton for around 2 episodes to talk about money, psychology and management. And I don't want to be up at 1 a.m. having a conversation, but I do because it's Sean Croxton. And Sean Croxton's fucking epic. And he was the person that got me into the industry I am. And I really enjoyed the first episode that I did with him. So I'm going to get up and stay up to 1 a.m. and have the conversations of 2, 3, 4, 5 and just lie in the next day. So if your time zones don't work, if you want to take this seriously and you want to have a really successful podcast with really good guests, prepare to be flexible around the time zones. Last thing on booking guests is once you've gone all that, sometimes you will need, I don't want to say filler guests because sometimes these will surprise you, but you will need some weeks that you'll have 5, 6 episodes booked ahead. You'll get loads of people booking in and sometimes people will reschedule, people will cancel. It's last minute. These things happen and that's the world we live in. But sometimes you will need a guest right there and then. If that's the case, I would recommend a website called Podbooker. This allows you not only to go and look for podcast guests for you and people will pitch themselves to you for the podcast guests. You can drop a message, see if they're the right fit and then send them the Calendly link, but also allows you to ask to be on other people's podcasts, which is a great way of marketing. This is something I want to do more in 2022 is be on more podcasts myself to promote the show and just have good conversations with more people. So there's my tips for how to book guests. But you've now booked your guests and now the important thing is how to have a good interview, how to have a good conversation. And I've been very, very honored that people have said that I'm a good interviewer from listening to my show. And I've had many, many guests actually say that it's the favorite interview they'd ever done. And I'm very humbled by that. And I wasn't expecting that at all. And I think a lot of that is the fact that I've spoken to a lot of people in my life, Working as a personal trainer means I've spoken to many people from many backgrounds. I've ran education for many years in global gyms positions that has allowed me to be fairly good at public speaking. Now, if you don't have that, if you don't have a constant stream of different people to talk to, if you're not used to public speaking and you don't have personal training, which certainly helps with this, you don't have to. Like, try and speak to as wide array of people as possible and get good at having conversations. Make a conversation with your hairdresser, your taxi driver, anyone you meet in life. Make a conversation in the lift with someone. It may seem silly, but those small conversations allows you to be more comfortable in a room talking to someone that you don't know, and that eases the nerves and the fear. And I still get it. I still get nervous when I land a big guest, but once the conversation starts, I'm a bit more prepared and autopilot and confident that I can keep that conversation flowing. Next step is do your research and come prepared with talking points. Don't ever go to a podcast not knowing who your guest is. It's down to you to know enough about them to come up with key talking points of what's going to be a good conversation. But talking points will trump set questions every single time. One of the biggest things that puts me off a podcast when I'm listening to if it feels too robotic or if it feels too scripted. So come up with key talking points so that you can bring the show back if the conversation ever slows down. If you get into a tangent and it slows down, you've got your next question that you can start to go into, but be flexible with it. Let the conversation flow to whatever talking point comes naturally. Sometimes I'll hit point 1, then I'll hit point 4, then I'll hit point 8, then I'll hit point 2. Let the conversation flow wherever it's going to go, and don't go scared to go off on tangents, because sometimes the tangents are the best bits for your podcast. I will always remember the episode I did with Pat Davidson, where I asked him if there was one bit of advice for someone who was climbing out of a hole with depression or alcoholism. And he went into this analogy for 20 minutes talking about the mountainside, and uses analogy of how climbing a mountain is a way of, looking at getting out of a hole, improving your mental health, improving your personal development. And I was captivated. And if I stuck to my script and my questions, I may not have got that response. So don't be scared of going for tangents. This is the reason why most of my podcasts are long form interviews, because you really do get the best out of people's conversation when it goes beyond the small talk. And following on with that point, actually listen. The biggest thing that will ruin your interviewing skills is that you are thinking about what you're going to say next. In the back of your head, you're thinking, where's my next question? Here's where I'm going to next. The times where I've found myself doing that are the times where I've got myself stifled and stuttery in a podcast and they haven't been the best shows on my behalf. When I've taken the time to actually listen, the conversation goes way more. We go on to talking points that I never thought possible. And have your talking points to the side, like you have your Zoom on your left of your screen. The other half of your screen should be your talking points. So you can always glance over when the conversation ends. If you get too caught up in what they're saying and you just get zoned in and you just forget about what you're going to say next entirely. I've had that happen before. Jordan Shallow's episode is certainly like that because the guy goes on such entertaining tangents. I just got caught up listening to the guy. And then I had to go and have a look and bring myself back into the room because I got so caught up in it. But remember, the podcast isn't as much of an opportunity for you to learn as it is for your audience to learn. So if you're so worried about making this good interview or asking the right questions that you're not listening to the show, not only does it affect your audience, it affects your enjoyment of the show because you started this probably to have good conversations with interesting people. Embrace the present and enjoy the conversations while you're having them. Last thing I'm going to talk about for being a good interviewer is get inspired for closing questions. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to multiple ones a day. And I always look at what the closing questions are on those podcasts. And I take a few things for a number of reasons. One, if I use a closing question that I find on another person's show, it gives me a chance to reference that person's show. And I think that's really good. I think we all stand on the shoulders of giants. And the more I can give back to the people that inspired me, the better. And it gets people talking about things. And it gets my guests looking at each other and learning from each other and broadening their network. So I often use what are you most grateful for, which is the question that Chris Van Vliet asks all his interviews. And another one that Stephen Bartlett uses from A Diary of a CEO is talking about asking a question for their future guests, one that I've added in very, very recently. But one that I really, really like at the moment, I think really does set my podcast apart is a lot of time I used to ask after the show, do you have an idea of a podcast guest I should get on next? And I got some people replying, but some people didn't. But now I ask that within the show. And every now and again, you'll get people have to stop and think and be like, oh, I don't know. But for every person that does that, you get another person that goes, this person would be perfect. it broadens your network, and it gets people speaking about people that inspire them. It also gets your guests wanting to go back and listen to your show. How many times do you have a guest on your podcast who may come on the podcast, may enjoy it, may share that episode, but never listen to another show because they're not on it? If you now know that you're going to go out and find a guest that they want to listen to, you might find that your guests start listening to your show. They may share other episodes of your show, and in turn, your audience grows and you start to build a relationship with that person and their network. So I think that is a phenomenal question, and I think it shows that even the most richest, most in shape, most confident person in the room always has other people that inspire them, and it really does ground the show in that everyone here is just looking to improve and everyone has things that they want to learn. So you've now got your interview, you've now recorded it on Zoom or wherever else you're recording it. Now we're going to talk about editing. Now I'm very simplistic with my editing. I don't do very much, again, because I don't want to overwhelm it. Something I'm learning this year is a much more robust editing skill set. And if that's the case, my editing might change. If I do this episode again in 6 months, this may be very, very different than it is today. But first thing I do is I will create an opening blurb. So on QuickTime Audio Player, I'll record some audio, just like I'm doing with this episode, and create an intro for that guest. Who they are, what they do, why I wanted to get them on the show, and some key things that are important to take away from this episode, just to entice the listener to go and listen to the whole show, looking for these talking points. I will then go in and say that if you enjoy the show, please leave us a review and share on social media, tagging myself at Quincy Dutton and at insert guests handle here. And I also mentioned that to put it in the show notes. This is also a great opportunity if you've done the podcast for a while and you want to use this to sell coaching or plug sponsors. This is a good time to quickly do it, just in between the build up of the show and the actual show itself. Then once I've got that, I will put that audio into iMovie, is what I use, and then I will create a transition that works in multiple places. So what I did is when I went on Fiverr, and in Fiverr I got them to make a YouTube intro. So I've got a short YouTube intro which is all animated, that I just used the music for that intro. Rather than creating a podcast intro and then creating a YouTube intro and spending twice the money, what I've done is I've created one YouTube intro and I used the audio for that to transition from the intro into the main show. And then I literally just throw the audio in. It's unedited, it's unfiltered. I don't cut out anyone's views. I want to make sure this is a true, open and honest conversation in a world where the mainstream media maybe are telling us overly edited, overly fixated lies. I want my podcast to be a method of truth and a method of different opinions. And for that, I will not edit anyone's shows for the main show. But what I will do then is edit it for my next talking point, which is repurposing content and marketing your show. So Buzzsprout offers a phenomenal thing called Buzzsprout Soundbites. So when you've got a show, you can create one soundbite per episode, where you can click on it and you will get, you can choose the minute, whether it's 30 seconds, 45 seconds or a minute of the show that you want to cut out. You can listen to it, see if it cuts in the right places, fine tune it, and you can download a little graphic which has like a little sound bar, the picture of the show. And then you can repurpose that on all your social media platforms. So that's good for people that like to learn from audio. That's a great thing. You can also put this on YouTube. Over time, YouTube can create ad revenue. It hasn't done for me yet. I'm too early in this. Maybe if I do this in 6 months to a year, I'll have more to talk about with this. But having a YouTube audience for wanting the video side of this and having the podcast audience is a great way of doing this. So I would put all my shows on YouTube at the moment without the intro, purely because if you want a little bit of extra bonus content, go to the actual podcast stream itself, but all the videos will go up onto YouTube. And then I will look at editing some clips down for YouTube and Instagram. Now, as I said, at the moment, I'm not a great editor. I might have more tips for you in a year's time, but at the moment I'm using Fiverr. It's a way of cheaply outsourcing editing, but it also, what I found is it gives you an outside perspective of what parts of the show are valuable. It's quite often you get in your own head, it's your show, your interview, and you find the bits that you think will be valuable might not actually be the things that are actually valuable to your audience. Getting an outsourced opinion of this by your editor going through your podcast and choosing the bits they think are valuable, you may be surprised at what they come back with, and you may find better clips than you thought ever possible. And then these can be repurposed on any sort of social media platform that you wish. So now we've got ways of distributing your content to various places. Let's talk about making your content stand out. Creating a thumbnail the thing with me with a thumbnail is to make it personal per guest. I've seen people that just have the same generic thumbnail for every guest, and if someone was to go and find an episode of where to link it, or they're just, they're scrolling through Instagram, if they see the same thing over and over again, it won't stand out. So make your thumbnails personal. Using Canva, as I mentioned before, is a great way of doing this. And if you're not a natural designer, get someone to edit a template for you on Canva that you can quick and easy edit. So I started off with just using it myself and got, my designs looked all right, I thought, but they certainly didn't look as professional as you do now. I worked with a guy called David McPhee who created a podcast thumbnail for me that I basically resized and repurposed for YouTube content, and then just changed the main picture, changed the title, and hey presto, there's my podcast thumbnails. Next thing is to leverage your audience. So Instagram collaborations and tagging is a really good feature that's now on Instagram. Rather than just tagging someone in the show and hoping they share it, asking them to collaborate. Some people won't. Some people have their design that they want their Instagram account to look like, and your aesthetic and your colors just doesn't fit in with them. Okay, that's cool. They'll probably share it on the stories, but they might not share it on the main page. But if you click collaboration on a show and they click yes, it also appears in their Instagram feed. A great example of one that really kicked off in my number one episode was with Kasim Hansen of N1. He clicked OK to be on the collaborator. He has over 100,000 followers. Now more eyes came onto my podcast and allowed me to get a greater reach for that episode. And since those collaborations come in, I have seen an upturn in the amount of downloads I've had per episode. I've seen more people stick around to watch the show, and I've seen the amount of downloads go up month on month. And if you look, and I'll put a post on my stories at Kingsley Dutton on Instagram if you want to have a look, where it shows the growth of my podcast since the start has been consistently growing at a fast rate. So even though I'm not having the same downloads as a London Reel or a Joe Rogan, it is going up quickly, and I'm excited to see where this goes within the next year. Last thing for this is then talking about them on your stories. So when you post it on the stories, don't just post a thumbnail there and hope people come. If you record it, they won't just come. Talk about the show. Why should your audience go and listen to X guest? What were the key bits of the show? What lessons did you take away? Why did you enjoy recording the show? And tag them in the stories, because they will more often than not repost this, because it takes very, very little effort to do so. So that's it for marketing the show. As I said, I'm still only just under a year into the podcasting game. I'm not an expert in marketing for this by any stretch of imagination. And this, if I redo this in 6 months to a year, this is the thing that will be the most different. But getting on other people's shows is my next strategy to talk about the podcast more and get more people's eyes on it. So that brings me up to my last thing, and that is the future of the podcast. What are my long-term goals for the show and what I'm looking to do with this? Sometimes you have this idea in your head that doing something will be amazing, and it doesn't live up to the hype. Podcasting for me has lived up to the hype and then some. I wanted to do it for years as a passion project, not sure whether it would actually be something that I enjoyed doing. And then when I started, it's been the most enjoyable part of my last year. It is hands down the best thing that I have done in a very, very long time. And I want to make this a huge part of what I do. So for me, my long-term aim is to challenge Rogan, get cancelled too, just like Rogan's getting pressure on him. And for that, I need your support. This year, I'm going to look at finding ways to monetize the podcast to allow me to do more of them, to give you guys more content for free, and to allow you to get access to much better guests. The first way of doing this is I've opened up a site called buymeacoffee.com, which just allows you guys, if you want to support the podcast. Nothing's going to be changing. Nothing's going behind a paywall. This is just a way that if you've been listening to the show for a while and you want to support this passion project and allow us to do more with the show, you can log onto the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes and drop a donation that's enough to buy me 1 coffee, 2 coffees, and it can be as small or as big as you like. But if you want to support the show, I would really, really appreciate it, and it will just allow me to do more. The things we've got in mind in doing more is, the first thing is doing more of these Solo Solutions episodes again. Now, with my other business, running an online coaching business and a one-to-one coaching business, the Solo Solutions episodes fallen by the wayside a little bit. And I want to make sure that comes back as a regular Thursday thing. And that is going to be my next thing when we get to a point where the podcast can sustain that extra bit of time away from my business. And it's a real thing I'm really excited to do. So if you enjoy this, let me know. If you have any topics that you want me to cover in a Solo Solutions episode, then let me know. Drop me a DM on Instagram if there's anything you want to talk about, or just share this show so that you know you like this show. Next thing is, would people like a clip show? I appreciate that my podcasts are long, and that I do not apologize for that, nor will that ever change. I like long form interviews. I feel you get better conversations with long form interviews, but I appreciate that some people like listening to bite-sized information. And this is what Solo Solutions was there for, to have something that was, 10 to 30 minutes. This is my longest Solo Solutions episode. Clips from this, but maybe if I got my edited clips that I put on YouTube and Instagram as videos, if I put a few of them together as solely audio content, would that be something that you'd be interested in, as sort of like a 2 or 3 clips from a show, and then that may get you to go and listen to the full show and inspire you to know which episodes are worth going back and looking at? Let me know again if that's something you want to do. And I want to close with dream guests. My aim is to bring you the best and highest quality guests that I can. The podcast started off as a mainly fitness podcast, and the future of the podcast may not be as much fitness as ever before. I have had a transition at the end of this year with where I value my content and where I see my place in the world. And I generally think, after watching the Bond movie and how that ending went down, it really got me into the topic of male mental health and how men are having a harder time than ever before to be heard, valued, and representation for them is going down. And I want to be able to be in a position where I can support men and that may be struggling, and find people that may inspire them. And that's going to be in every aspect of their life. So health and wellness will always be the underpinning of this podcast, because I do think if you get your health and your physique in order, the confidence and the energy that gives you leads into other areas of your life. The ability to improve your life in other aspects by learning things like delayed gratification, to learning how to fail in the gym and working hard, does translate to everything that you do outside of it. But that being said, I want to get more people on that are going to be in the business realm, in the mental health game, in breath work and recovery and stress management. I want to broaden this to a podcast where if you're a guy or a girl who wants to improve their lives in every aspect, I want this to be the go-to show for you guys. Dream podcast guest for me, firstly, Darren Brown. I'm a huge fan of magic, and I think the guy is incredible. The psychology knowledge that he has of being able to influence, be able to, how he carries himself, how he holds an audience is phenomenal. CM Punk, the man who escaped a toxic work environment and inspired the masses to follow him along his path. The voice of the voiceless will be another dream guest for me. And in the fitness space, I still look at John Berardi as the man whose business really, really inspired me to grow, and he's helped probably more people than anyone else in the industry, both in their physique, but now also their business and wealth management. So those are probably my 3 top dream guests, but there are so many more. I mean, I'd love to speak to Triple H because he's the guy who got me into the gym. But if you have any suggestions, again, find me at Kingsley Dutton. Drop me your favourite guest for the podcast, and I will reach out to everybody. I have got messages now pending with Chris Williamson and Louis Theroux. We'll see if that comes to anything. But there are other 2 people that I would really, really like to speak to. But that's it from me. If you have any questions about starting a podcast, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts and love to hear the stories you have on starting a podcast, how it's changed your lives. And if you're procrastinating on it, tell me what is scaring you and what is overwhelming you with this, because I was exactly in your boat a year ago. And I can tell you that if I was procrastinating on this for next year, I wouldn't have had the amazing stories that I have today. And this has been during a year of difficulty with lockdowns and losing my job, getting fired. My podcast has kept me on the straight and narrow and has kept me inspired and pushing for more. So it's definitely worth it. So thank you guys, and I will speak to you all very, very soon.